You are everything to me.
And you to me.
They laughed when she walked in wearing a borrowed dress and a stranger's name tag. They stopped laughing when the most dangerous man in Seoul crossed the room, ignored every heiress in it, and knelt to retie her shoe like she was the only person worth touching. The thing about expensive rooms is they all smell the same: money, hairspray, and the particular nervous sweat of people terrified someone richer is judging them. Amina had learned that smell in London years before she ever set foot in Seoul, and the Huang family ballroom didn't smell any different just because the chandeliers were bigger. She stood near the champagne table in a black dress she borrowed from Mrs. Yoon's housekeeper, watching 300 of South Korea's most dangerous and decorated people pretend they weren't all calculating each other's net worth between sips of a $400 vintage. Somewhere in this room was a man who'd ordered the bridge collapse that killed 11 people last spring and gotten away clean. Somewhere else was a senator's wife wearing earrings that cost more than the bridge repair would have. Nobody here was who they appeared to be, Amina included. "You're standing wrong," Mrs. Yoon hissed at her, not even turning her head. "You're supposed to be invisible, not lurking like you're casing the silverware." "I'll work on my posture," Amina said. She didn't mention that she'd already memorized 3 exits, the position of every camera in the East Wing, and the fact that the man pouring drinks at the second bar wasn't actually staff. His shoes were too good, and staff didn't wear shoes that good unless they were being paid by someone other than the catering company. The whispers started maybe 20 minutes later, the way mosquitoes start, quiet, then everywhere. "Is she lost? Who let the help wander the floor? Mrs. Yoon really brought that as her +1? A woman in emerald silk laughed behind a champagne flute, not bothering to lower her voice, the way people only fail to lower their voices when they've decided you don't count as a person who can hear. Amina sipped her sparkling water and thought, not unkindly, that cruelty in rooms like this was always disappointingly unoriginal. 3 jokes rotated all night, like a tribute band that only knew one album. She'd been mocked by better people in worse shoes. She kept her spine straight and her face pleasant, because the moment you let people see the hit land, you'd already lost something you couldn't get back. What none of them knew, what Mrs. Yoon herself didn't know, was that the soft-spoken assistant currently being snickered at by Seoul's elite had once sat across a boardroom table from men exactly like the ones in this ballroom, watching her father unravel their finances one patient line at a time. Adeyemi and Associates, Forensic Accounting, London. Before the fire that wasn't an accident. Before the name change. Before she learned that the safest place to hide a knife is in plain sight, smiling, holding someone else's coat. She caught a server fumbling a tray near the dessert table, champagne flutes sliding, the poor kid's face already going gray with the specific panic of someone who knows a $200 A-plate mistake just became their fault. Amina crossed the floor without thinking twice and caught 2 glasses before they hit marble, crouching to gather the rest, murmuring something low and reassuring in Korean that made the boy's shoulders drop an inch. "It's fine. Nobody even noticed. Breathe." Someone had noticed. From the balcony above, a man in a charcoal suit that had clearly never once been called nice, because nice was an insult for something that expensive, watched the entire 11-second exchange with the stillness of someone who'd trained himself not to react to anything in public. Kang Min-jae had spent the evening doing what he always did at these things, performing the particular boredom of a king who finds his own court tedious. It kept the wolves honest, or at least quiet. He'd buried 2 ambitious cousins this year alone, politely, the way a bank denies a loan, and he was tired in the bone-deep way that comes from being surrounded entirely by people who wanted something from him and called it loyalty. Then he saw the woman in the borrowed dress get down on a marble floor in front of 300 witnesses to keep a teenage server from losing his job. Interesting, he thought. He watched for her tell, the little flicker people get when they remember the room is watching, when the kindness becomes performance. It never came. She helped, she stood, she smiled at the boy, and she went right back to being furniture as far as the room was concerned. Min-jae had built an empire reading the half-second before people remembered they were being watched. Hers never ended. That was either the realest person in the building, or the most expensive secret in it. He intended to find out which, and something told him, watching her smooth her borrowed dress and disappear back into the wallpaper like she'd never moved at all, that whichever answer he got, his very predictable, very boring evening was about to become a great deal more complicated. Down on the ballroom floor, Amina had no idea she was being watched. If she had, she might have told him exactly what she told herself every time a room like this decided she didn't belong in it. Let them laugh. They always do, right before they're wrong. The royal dance was a Huang family tradition older than half the alliances in the room, and everyone knew the unwritten rule: the most powerful man present chose his partner, and that choice was never random. It was a chess move wearing a tuxedo. So when the orchestra shifted into the opening bars and Kong Min-jae rose from his table, every woman under 40 performed the same subtle recalibration: chin lifted, shoulders back, the international body language for pick-me. Somewhere near the dessert table, the senator's daughter actually set down her drink, which in this crowd was basically a declaration of war. Min-jae didn't look at any of them. He walked the length of the ballroom in a silence so complete you could hear his shoes against marble, past 3 heiresses, 2 would-be brides arranged by their fathers, and 1 very confused Italian contessa who'd flown in specifically for this. The room held its breath collectively, the way a crowd does right before a magic trick either works or humiliates everyone involved. He stopped in front of Amina. She actually turned to check who was standing behind her. "There's no one there," he said, and there was something almost amused tucked into the words, the particular delight of a man who has just stumbled onto the only unscripted 5 minutes of his entire decade. "I'm asking you." "I think you have the wrong assistant," Amina said, because someone needed to say the obvious thing out loud before this got more embarrassing for everybody. "I know exactly who I'm asking." The room had gone the kind of silent where you could hear ice melting in 300 abandoned drinks. Mrs. Yoon's face had cycled through confusion, horror, and something close to opportunistic recalculation, all in under 4 seconds, already wondering how my assistant, the Queen's chosen one, might look on a business card. Amina took his hand. Not because she was flattered, though she'd be lying if some small, stubborn part of her didn't enjoy watching Emerald Silkwoman's jaw drop somewhere near the floor, but because refusing him publicly was its own kind of spotlight, and spotlights were the one thing a woman with her particular hobbies could not afford. "You're not nervous," Min-jae said as they moved into the first turn, his hand settling at her waist like a man memorizing coordinates for later use. "Everyone in this room is nervous around me. It's usually the only personality trait they have. I've survived worse parties than this with worse company," Amina said. "You're at least mildly interesting. That's a low bar, but you've cleared it." He laughed, a real one, short and rough, like a muscle that hadn't been used in years and had forgotten it still worked. Several guests actually flinched at the sound, as if the King of Seoul's underworld laughing in public violated some kind of treaty. "Most people compliment my suit," he said. "Most people are afraid of you. I'm just unimpressed." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Fear has better posture." That earned a second laugh, quieter, just for her, and for one unguarded second Amina saw something in his face that didn't belong to the legend, not the man who'd reportedly ended 3 rival operations with a single phone call, but a tired man who'd been performing untouchable for so long he'd half forgotten what being touched felt like. It was, she'd think later, the most dangerous thing about him. Not the rumors. The loneliness underneath them. The dance ended. He didn't let go of her hand right away, and 300 guests watched him not let go with the focused attention usually reserved for stock market crashes. "My queen," he said, loud enough for the room, steady enough that no one, not the Huangs, not the heiresses, not the senator pretending he hadn't choked on an hors d'oeuvre, could pretend they'd misheard. It wasn't theater. Amina knew theater, she'd performed plenty of it herself, in this exact dress, for this exact crowd, for the past year. This was a man drawing a line in wet cement before anyone in the room could argue about where his territory ended. The whispers that had mocked her an hour earlier, "She must be lost," "Who let the help wander the floor," evaporated into a silence so total it was almost funny. Almost. Amina caught the eye of the woman in emerald silk, who looked like she'd just watched her own retirement plan walk out the door on someone else's arm. Here was the part nobody in that ballroom understood, the part Amina herself hadn't fully planned for. She'd spent a year engineering her way into rooms exactly like this one, patient and quiet, the way her father taught her to read a balance sheet, one line at a time, never the headline first. She'd expected to remain furniture. Useful, unnoticed, gone before anyone learned her real name. She had not expected the single most dangerous man in the country to make her impossible to ignore. If you were standing in that ballroom right now, watching a man with that kind of power choose the one woman everyone else had decided wasn't worth a second look, would you call it romance, or would you wonder what he saw that the rest of the room missed? Sit with that one, because by the end of this story, you might change your answer twice. Backstage, behind a service door no one but staff ever used, a man in a catering jacket that fit slightly too well lowered his phone after photographing the entire dance. He typed a single message to a number saved only as a string of digits. She's not just an assistant. Confirm, is this the Adeyemi girl? The reply came back in under a minute. Find out. Quietly. Before he does. Amina, still holding the most dangerous man in Seoul's hand under a chandelier worth more than her father's old firm, had no idea the clock had just started running. The thing about being declared my queen in front of 300 witnesses is that the title doesn't come with a manual, and Amina spent the car ride home composing several furious, unsendable speeches about consent and personal autonomy that she never got the chance to deliver, because Min Jae's driver dropped her at Mrs. Yoon's residence at 1 a.m., and by 9 a.m. there was already a black SUV idling outside with a man in sunglasses holding a door open like she hadn't already figured out how doors worked. Mr. Kong requests your company for breakfast, the driver said. Mr. Kong requested a dance. He didn't request a relationship with veto power over my mornings. Mr. Kong said you'd say something like that. He said to tell you breakfast or he'll come up himself and explain it to Mrs. Yoon's entire building. Amina got in the car. Partly because the threat was, infuriatingly, exactly the right amount of charming. Mostly because she needed 5 uninterrupted minutes inside his orbit to figure out exactly how much trouble last night had caused her, and there was no faster way to gather intelligence than letting the target hand deliver you breakfast. He was already seated when she arrived, in a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a museum exhibit titled Man Who Has Never Once Worried About Money. No photographs anywhere. That, Amina filed away immediately. People who could afford photographs and chose not to display any were either deeply private or deeply careful, and in her experience those were usually the same wound wearing different clothes. You could have just texted, she said, sitting across from him. I don't have your number. That's a solvable problem that didn't require an SUV. I wanted to see your face when you realized I'd find a way regardless. He poured her tea without asking, which should have annoyed her and instead landed somewhere closer to noted, dangerous, continue observing. Last night, you said I was mildly interesting. I've been thinking about that insult for 9 hours. That's not normal for me. Most things people say to you, you can buy your way out of caring about. I imagine that gets boring. It does. He studied her over the rim of his cup, and there it was again, that flicker she'd caught on the dance floor, the tired man under the legend. Who are you, Amina? Mrs. Yoon's assistant. Mrs. Yoon's assistant doesn't carry herself like someone who's memorized every exit in a room within 90 seconds of entering it. I watched you do it last night, before you ever noticed the server. You catalogued the building before you touched the champagne. Amina kept her face perfectly, professionally still, a skill that had once kept her alive in rooms far less polite than this one. Old habits. I had a difficult upbringing. So did I. Mine involved learning 17 ways to disarm a man before I learned to drive. What were yours? Mine involved learning that men like you ask questions they already suspect the answers to, just to watch how a person lies. She set down her cup, deliberate, unhurried. I'm not going to perform discomfort for you, Min Jae. If you have a theory about who I am, say it. If you're fishing, I'd rather you just enjoy your eggs. For a moment he simply looked at her, really looked, the way he probably looked at balance sheets and betrayals and the occasional body, and then he smiled, slow, like a man recalculating a number he'd assumed was fixed. That, he said, is the most honest thing anyone said to me in this apartment in 4 years. She didn't trust the warmth that put in her chest. Warmth was expensive and she'd budgeted exactly none of it for a man with a body count and a balcony view, no matter how good his hands had felt on the dance floor or how rusty and real his laugh had sounded. But across the city, in an office with blackout windows and 3 monitors running facial recognition software that absolutely should not have existed outside government contracts, the man in the Too Good catering jacket from the night before sat across from someone far more dangerous than a confused Mafia King with a crush. It's her, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Photographs, old ones, a younger Amina in a London courtroom hallway, her father beside her, both dressed for a deposition that would end with his firm's name in every financial paper in England. Adeyemi's daughter. The forensic accountant's kid. The woman across the desk, silver-haired, unbothered, the kind of calm that only comes from decades of being the most dangerous person in every room she's ever entered, closed the folder without opening it fully. Her father got too close to the Huang shipping accounts 11 years ago, she said. We thought we buried that problem with him. Looks like the problem grew up. And Kong Min Jae just put a crown on it in front of 300 witnesses. The silver-haired woman allowed herself something close to a smile, thin, satisfied, the expression of someone who'd just been handed a complication and recognized it instantly as an opportunity instead. Then we let her get comfortable, she said. A queen makes a much more interesting hostage than an assistant ever could. Back in the penthouse, Amina had no idea her name, her real name, the one she'd buried in London along with her father, was already being said out loud by people who'd helped put him in the ground. She only knew that Min Jae had just reached across the table, gently, and turned her teacup so the handle faced her hand, a small unthinking courtesy that didn't match anything she'd read about him in a single intelligence file. Whatever you're hiding, he said quietly, I'm going to find out. I'd rather you tell me yourself, before someone else does it for you, badly, with worse intentions. She believed him. That was the problem. She just didn't know yet that the someone else clock was already running, and it was running faster than either of them thought. 3 weeks into being unofficially, unaskingly Seoul's most talked about woman, Amina had developed a new morning ritual, waking up, checking for surveillance, and then checking the society pages to see what she'd allegedly worn, said, or schemed the night before, according to people who'd never actually spoken to her. Mystery Queen seen leaving Kong Tower at midnight, she had, in fact, left at 9 p.m., sober, having discussed shipping manifests for 2 hours, which was somehow less interesting to print. Sources say she's after his fortune, sources, in this case, being the woman in emerald silk from the gala, who had apparently appointed herself Seoul's unofficial minister of gossip. Amina found the coverage almost soothing. Let them write fiction. Fiction kept them from asking the right questions. The wrong question came from Min Jae himself, on a Tuesday, in a kitchen he apparently never used for anything except standing in dramatically. My head of security ran a deeper background check on you, he said, without preamble, sliding a tablet across the counter. It came back clean. Suspiciously clean. The kind of clean you only get when someone with real skill built the cover themselves. Amina didn't reach for the tablet. And here I thought we were having a nice morning. We were. I'd like to keep having it. Which is why I need you to tell me what I'm about to find, instead of letting me find it. He wasn't angry. That was the unnerving part, he sounded almost gentle, like a man bracing himself for a wound he already half expected. I've buried people for less than what my gut is telling me about you, Amina. I haven't acted on it because I don't want to be right. That's new for me. I don't like it. She studied him for a long moment, weighing not whether to trust him exactly, but how much rope to hand a man who could, with one phone call, turn her into a very expensive disappearance. "My name wasn't always Amina Cole," she said finally. "It used to be Amina Adeyemi. My father ran a forensic accounting firm in London. 11 years ago he found a laundering pipeline running through a shipping operation with ties here, in Seoul. Before he could finish the report, his office burned down with him in it. Insurance called it faulty wiring. I called it a message." She held his gaze steady, the way she'd held it the night of the gala, the way she'd held it her entire adult life. "I didn't come to that ballroom for a dance, Min Jae. I came because the Huang family hosted it, and the Huang family is who my father was investigating when he died." The silence that followed had teeth in it. "You think I had something to do with that," he said slowly. "I think you're powerful enough that I needed to know for certain you didn't, before I let myself feel anything for you that wasn't strategic." She exhaled, the first fully honest breath she'd allowed herself in his presence. "For what it's worth, I've spent 3 weeks looking. You didn't do it. Your hands are dirty with plenty of things. That isn't one of them." He absorbed that the way he absorbed everything, still, controlled, calculating 3 moves ahead even while something raw moved behind his eyes. "So what was the dance? The hand-holding? Was that the plan too?" "The plan was to be invisible at a party, gather what I came for, and disappear before anyone learned my name." Her voice didn't waver, but something underneath it did. "You weren't supposed to be a variable. You walked across that ballroom and turned into one anyway." For a long moment, neither of them said anything, and Amina genuinely did not know which way this would break: fury, betrayal, the cold, business-like removal of a problem he could no longer afford to keep close. Instead, Min Jae picked up the tablet, looked at it once, and set it face down on the counter like a man choosing not to read his own verdict. "Whoever burned your father's office," he said, "is connected to the Huangs. Which means they're connected to people who were in that ballroom with us 3 weeks ago. Watching you. Possibly recognizing you." His jaw tightened, not at her, she realized, but at the math suddenly assembling itself in front of him. "I made you the most photographed woman in Seoul the same week you were quietly hunting the people responsible for your father's death." "Yes," Amina said. "You did. That's either the worst thing I've ever accidentally done to someone," he said, "or it's the only reason you're still alive, because no one's foolish enough to touch the woman I publicly called my queen without consequences they can't survive." It was, Amina would think later, the most honest love declaration she'd ever received, wrapped not in flowers but in threat assessments, which, given the company they kept, was somehow more romantic than it had any right to be. She didn't get the chance to answer him. Her phone buzzed once on the counter between them, an unknown number, a message with no greeting, the kind of message designed to land like a dropped glass. "We know who you are. We know what your father almost finished. Walk away from Kong Min Jae, or we finish what we started in London, except this time, we won't bother making it look like an accident." Amina set the phone down very carefully, the way you set down anything you're afraid of throwing. "Well," she said, and her voice was steadier than her hands. "It seems someone else read the society pages too." Min Jae read the message twice, then a third time, the way a man rereads a contract looking for the clause that lets him burn the whole building down legally. "Give me the phone," he said. "Why? So you can trace a number that's already been wiped from whatever burner sent it?" Amina was already moving, pulling her coat off the back of the chair, her mind doing the thing it had been trained to do for over a decade, sorting threat from noise, exit from trap. "Whoever sent this wanted me rattled, not caught. They're not stupid enough to leave a trail this early. Then we make them stupid." His voice had dropped into a register she hadn't heard from him before, not the amused, rusty-laughed man from the dance floor, but something colder underneath it, the version of him that had apparently buried 2 cousins this year alone, politely, like denying a loan. "I have 11 people who can find out who owns that number by tonight. And the moment your 11 people start asking, the Huangs know I've made a move. I've spent a year being patient specifically so that didn't happen. She turned to face him fully. This isn't your war, Min Jae. It's mine. It was mine before you ever crossed that ballroom. It became mine the second you let me hold your hand under a chandelier in front of every enemy I have. He said it simply, without performance, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd shouted it. You don't get to hand me half a truth and then ask me to stay out of the other half. She wanted to argue. She didn't, because he wasn't wrong, and because some small, traitorous part of her, the part that had spent a decade learning not to need anyone, was quietly, desperately relieved she didn't have to do this alone anymore. Fine, she said. But we do this my way. Quiet. Patient. Your way gets people killed in restaurants. My way gets people convicted. He almost smiled. You really were planning to bring down an empire with paperwork. Paperwork built the empire. Paperwork can unbuild it. She picked her phone back up, screenshotting the threat before the sender could remote wipe anything else. My father used to say the people who think they're untouchable are always the ones who kept the receipts. They think the receipts protect them. They don't realize the receipts are just a noose with extra steps. For the next 4 days, Seoul's most photographed couple disappeared from every society page entirely. No galas, no balconies, no carefully staged dinners for paparazzi to misreport. Behind the blackout windows of Min Jae's private office, Amina rebuilt the case her father had died finishing. Shell companies routed through 3 countries, shipping manifests that didn't match cargo weights, a decade-old wire transfer pattern that, once you knew what you were looking at, was about as subtle as a marching band in a library. The Huang family's name sat at the center of it like a spider that had grown too confident in its own web. There, Amina said on the 4th night, sliding a printout across the desk, her finger landing on a single line item. This account moved $40 million through a shipping subsidiary the same month my father's office burned. Same week. They didn't even bother spacing it out. They thought no one was ever coming back to check. Min Jae studied the line, then her face, with the particular intensity of a man recalculating exactly how dangerous the woman across from him really was, and liking the answer more than he probably should have. You built this in 4 days, he said. From memory and instinct. I built the foundation 11 years ago. I just had to remember where I buried it. She met his eyes. This is the part where I ask you something, and I need you to actually think before you answer, because once you say yes, there's no quiet version of this left. The Huangs aren't just dangerous to me. Taking them down publicly destroys alliances you've spent your whole career protecting. People will come for you too. Let them. Min Jae, you asked me to think before I answered. I have. I've been thinking about it since the message came in. He leaned forward, and for once there was no performance in his face at all, no king, no legend, just a tired man who'd apparently decided something with his whole chest. I told you at that gala you weren't furniture. I meant it before I knew any of this. I mean it more now. You don't get to carry this alone just because you're used to it. If you were Amina right now, finally handed the help you spent a decade learning to live without, from a man whose hands are nowhere near clean, would you take it, or would independence be the harder, safer habit to keep? Worth sitting with, because the next 48 hours were about to answer that question whether either of them was ready or not. Because 3 floors below them, in a security office Min Jae trusted with his life, the man in the too good catering jacket had just finished a phone call with the silver-haired woman from the blackout windowed office across town. They're building a case, he confirmed. Fast. She's better than her father was. Then we stop being patient, the woman said. Move the timeline up. If the queen wants a war, give her one before she's finished loading the gun. Amina didn't know it yet, but somewhere in Seoul, a date had just been circled, and it was considerably sooner than the quiet, paperwork-driven justice she'd spent a decade carefully assembling. The fire alarm went off at 2 a.m., which was, Amina would later reflect, almost insultingly on brand for people who'd already tried to kill her with fire once before. She was awake before the second blast of the siren, every old instinct firing at once: exits, windows. The fact that fire alarms triggered remotely rarely meant an actual fire and almost always meant someone wanted you moving in a predictable direction. She grabbed the drive containing 4 days of evidence from the desk before she grabbed anything else, including, notably, her shoes. Min Jae was already in the hallway, phone to his ear, voice flat and lethal in a way she hadn't heard from him before. Lock the east stairwell. Nobody leaves through the east stairwell. He caught her eye. Service elevator. Now. That's exactly where they'll expect us to run. That's why I have 6 men already in it. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw the full machine underneath the charm, the man who hadn't survived this long in Seoul's underworld by being merely likable. You wanted quiet and patient. I'm giving you quiet and patient with backup. Move. They made it to the parking structure in under 90 seconds, which was either excellent training or the specific kind of luck that comes from a man who'd clearly run this exact drill before, possibly more than once, possibly with less personal investment in the outcome. It wasn't luck. The black SUV waiting for them wasn't his. Amina clocked it a half second before Min Jae did, wrong plates, engine already running, a driver who hadn't bothered concealing the kind of patience that only comes from someone who's done this before and isn't worried about being caught at it. She grabbed his arm and pulled him sideways behind a concrete pillar half a breath before the first shot cracked off the structure's low ceiling, the sound bouncing and multiplying until it felt like the whole building was firing at them. Friends of yours? She asked, breathless, flat against concrete. Not anymore, apparently. He already had a weapon in his hand that she hadn't known he was carrying, which told her something about exactly how seriously he'd taken her warning 4 days ago. Huang family doesn't usually move this fast. Or this sloppy. They're not sloppy. They're rushed. Amina's mind was already 3 moves ahead, the same cold clarity that had once let her sit across from men who counted bodies the way her father counted assets. We hit something in that financial trail that scared them. They're not trying to kill us quietly anymore. They're trying to make sure we don't testify at all. Gunfire in an enclosed parking structure has a way of clarifying a relationship considerably faster than dinner dates do. By the time Min Jae's actual security team arrived, 11 people, just as promised, moving with the brutal efficiency of men who got paid extraordinarily well to be exactly this good. Amina had pulled 2 more rounds out of cover from behind a parked sedan and Min Jae had put one attacker on the ground without so much as raising his pulse, which was, Amina noted, deeply unfair on a purely physical attraction level given the circumstances. The ambush lasted 4 minutes. It felt considerably longer. When it was over, when the would-be shooters were either zip-tied or worse and Min Jae's people were already scrubbing the scene with the kind of speed that suggested this wasn't their first cleanup, Amina found herself sitting on the concrete, drive still clutched in one fist, hands shaking for the first time since this had started. Min Jae crouched in front of her, gun gone, both hands empty and open, like a man approaching something he was afraid of frightening off. "Hey," he said, quiet, the rusty laugh voice instead of the lethal one. "You're alive. We're alive. The drive's intact. They tried to kill us in a parking garage." "They tried," he agreed. "They failed. That's the part that matters. My father didn't get a they failed." Her voice cracked on it, finally, 11 years of careful control slipping for exactly 1 sentence. He got faulty wiring and a closed casket funeral and a daughter who had to learn to disappear before she turned 25. Min Jae didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her it would be fine, because they both knew better than that, and somehow that honesty was the thing that finally let her breathe. "Then we don't let them close this one quietly," he said instead. "We don't bury you the way they buried him. We make this loud. We make it impossible to wire fault away." He took the drive gently from her white-knuckled hand, not to take it from her, to hold it with her, both their hands wrapped around 11 years of evidence and 1 very bad night. You wanted paperwork to bring down an empire. Let's go make sure the whole country reads it. 3 floors up, in a security office now swarming with Min Jae's cleanup crew, a single laptop sat open and forgotten in the chaos, the one belonging to the man in the Too Good catering jacket, who'd run the moment the first shot fired and hadn't accounted for the fact that loyalty bought with fear has a way of evaporating the second the fear changes direction. Min Jae's head of security lifted the laptop, scrolled once, and went very still. "Sir," he said, "you're going to want to see this. It's not just the Huangs." Across the city, in the blackout-windowed office, the silver-haired woman watched a live security feed of the parking structure and the 4 bodies that weren't supposed to still be breathing, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, allowed herself something that wasn't quite fear, but was standing uncomfortably close to it. "She's better than her father," she said again, quieter this time, almost to herself. "We should have buried her in London when we had the chance." The clock that had started the night of the gala had just run out, and for once, it hadn't run out in the villain's favor. The laptop told a story bigger than Amina's 11 years of paperwork had ever managed to prove alone. It wasn't just the Huangs. The trail ran through a name Min Jae recognized instantly and hated immediately, his own father's former advisor, a silver-haired woman named Director Seo, who'd spent 2 decades quietly laundering money through 3 continents while wearing the perfectly respectable mask of family friend. She'd been at Min Jae's christening, apparently. She'd sent flowers when his father died. She'd also, according to 4 days of evidence and one very poorly secured laptop, ordered the fire that killed Amina's father and, 3 weeks ago, ordered the bullets that nearly killed his queen in a parking garage. "She practically raised me," Min Jae said, staring at the screen with the particular stillness of a man recalculating his entire childhood in real time. "I called her Imo. Auntie. Family's complicated when half of yours is laundering money through shipping containers," Amina said gently, because someone needed to, and because she recognized the specific grief of discovering the people who taught you to trust were the same people who'd taught you exactly how dangerous trust could be. "What do we do with this? We do what my father never got the chance to. We make it loud, public, and impossible to bury." Amina pulled the laptop toward her, fingers already moving. "Every financial regulator in 3 countries, every journalist who isn't on someone's payroll, every law enforcement contact you trust that isn't compromised. We send it everywhere, all at once, tonight. No quiet settlements. No wire fault excuses. No closed casket disappearing act. That burns down everything Director Seo built. It also burns down a few alliances I still need." "Then burn them," Amina said simply. "You told me 4 days ago that you weren't going to let me carry this alone because I was used to it. I'm telling you now, don't let fear of the fallout talk you into protecting people who tried to kill your queen." He looked at her for a long moment, and something settled in his face, not the king, not the legend, just a man finally choosing, fully, which version of his life he wanted to keep. "Send it," he said. By morning, Seoul's financial world had detonated quietly and then loudly, the way scandals do when the paperwork is too clean to argue with. Director Seo was arrested before noon, her decades of careful respectability collapsing in the space of a single news cycle. The Huang family's shipping empire folded under regulatory scrutiny within the week, their invitations, the same gilded little party favors laced with arsenic that had once decided who counted as somebody in Seoul, suddenly worth considerably less than the paper they were printed on. Amina watched it all from Min Jae's penthouse window, the city glittering below exactly as it had the night of the gala, except now she knew precisely how much rot had been hiding under all that glitter. "Your father would be proud," Min Jae said, coming to stand beside her, 2 cups of tea in hand, the same careful, unthinking courtesy he'd shown her that very first breakfast. "My father would tell me I took 11 years longer than necessary." She allowed herself a small, real smile, the first one that didn't have an audience to perform for. "He'd also tell me I picked a genuinely terrifying way to finish his work. A mafia boss's backup wasn't exactly the plan. You didn't pick me. I crossed a ballroom and made myself impossible to avoid." He set the tea down and turned to face her fully. For the record, I'd like to keep doing that. Crossing rooms toward you. Indefinitely. Even knowing everything now? Even knowing I came to that gala with an agenda, not a guest list invitation? Especially knowing that. He reached for her hand, the same way he had on the dance floor under that chandelier, except this time there was no audience left to perform for, no 300 witnesses recalculating their social ledgers, just two people who'd survived fire, betrayal, and a parking garage ambush to get to this exact, quiet moment. I told that room you were my queen before I knew the whole truth. Now that I do, I'd like to say it again. Properly, this time. If you'll have me. Amina thought about the woman who'd walked into that ballroom in a borrowed dress, invisible on purpose, expecting to disappear the moment her work was finished. She thought about every whisper that had mocked her, every assumption that had underestimated her, every single person who'd looked at her and seen only an assistant, a stranger, furniture in a room built for people who mattered. She thought about how thoroughly, spectacularly wrong all of them had been. Ask me properly, then, she said. And this time, I'll actually say yes out loud, instead of just letting you assume it. He laughed, that same rusty, real laugh from the dance floor, for years' worth of disuse finally, fully worn off. Soul glittered on below them, utterly unaware that its underworld had just survived the loudest scandal in a decade, gained a queen who'd earned her crown with paperwork instead of pedigree, and lost, permanently, the particular kind of people who'd once believed a black woman in a borrowed dress could never be anything more than the help. They were wrong. They were always going to be wrong. Some people just take a parking garage ambush and a federal investigation to finally learn it.